There was once a time where Factions was the biggest game mode in all of Minecraft. You would join a server that a YouTuber advertised, gather a few friends, and run thousands of blocks away from spawn and build a base that you hoped nobody would ever find and blow up. You would claim land, you would form alliances, and you would create enemies around the server. Then you would spend hours stacking up walls, grinding money, and collecting spawners, preparing for that one moment when another faction would inevitably try to take everything away from you. And honestly, even when you logged on to your entire base being blown up, there was still an appeal to it. Nothing in Factions was permanent. Every item you collected could be stolen, every alliance could collapse, and every person you trusted could betray you at any moment. Genuinely, for years, that specific formula helped define the competitive Minecraft multiplayer landscape, but today, Factions is nowhere near the position that it once held. And it's not really completely gone. There are still Faction servers and players who genuinely still enjoy playing the game mode, but it is nowhere near the top position it used to hold, and it's now kind of a niche part of the overall Minecraft server scene. With the death of the Factions game mode, a new type of server has risen up and taken over its place, the Economy SMP. Taking the same idea from Faction servers where players grind for money and build hidden bases, Economy SMPs take it one step further with having no land claims and no official Factions teams to call your own. Instead of faction v faction, it's player versus player. Some people might call it a completely different game mode, but I really don't think it is. I think that the Economy SMPs are what Factions kind of evolved into. And to understand how they evolved this way, we need to look at what made Factions so popular in the first place, what eventually pushed these players away, and how servers like DonutSMP rebuilt that same exact experience for a completely different generation of Minecraft players. At its core, Factions is a very simple idea. Players can create groups, claim territory, build bases, form alliances, and declare enemies for their faction. But this basic system completely changed how Minecraft survival felt for the average player. In normal survival, collecting diamonds eventually stops mattering. Once you hit that peak of good tools, good armor, and a finished base, there's nothing really left to accomplish for a player. However, Factions fixed that by giving everything a competitive purpose. Diamonds weren't just a crafting material. They were gear for your faction and a way to make extra money to compete for that top position. Obsidian was not just any other block, it was the literal layer between your enemies and your valuables in your base. And money wasn't just a number for these servers, it was the literal thing that you were competing for. It paid for your spawners, equipment, defenses, and whatever else the server used to measure a faction's strength. Even building dynamics changed. You were not creating a base because it looked nice, you were designing something that needed to survive a direct attack. It was kind of a fun arms race back in the day. Players would create walls filled with water, lava, sand, slabs, and other defenses, and then raiders would respond by building more advanced TNT cannons. Builders would study how those cannons worked and then adapt again, and then the cycle would continue. And server owners didn't really need to do anything besides make the sandbox for the players. The tech race was player driven, the arms race was player driven, conflict was player driven, everything on the server was player driven. This open sandbox feel and the tension and the already popular game mode made Factions perfect for YouTube. Going for a mining trip or building a base might not be a fun video, but mining for hours underground to find a secret hidden base in Factions would get millions of views. These views would drive more popularity to these servers, which further increased the YouTubers' already growing viewership. You had Woofless, Preston Plays, Vicstar, Lachlan, the Camping Rusher, all of these guys. And on top of that, once they found out the popularity of the mode, they made their own servers where they could control the narrative and the content flow. But what ended up happening is that these amazing systems that the Factions game mode made up were the exact reason why Factions ended up crumbling down as a game mode. Imagine joining a faction server for the first time. You spawn with basic gear, you probably don't know anyone on the server, you don't understand how the server's economy works, how the custom enchants work, base rules, cannon mechanics, or which faction actually has control of the map. Meanwhile, established factions already have farms, spawners, money, members, allies, they have everything. You are not beginning at the bottom of a fair competition. You are beginning the server as somebody else's free loot bag. And this kind of dynamic was one of Factions' biggest weaknesses. The experience was incredible when you were already a part of it, but brutal when you're trying to enter it and see what the game mode was about. A new player really had three options. Join an established faction but be a grunt, create a small group that was unlikely to really compete with the big top dogs, or spend most of the map hiding and hoping that nobody important noticed their base. The bigger the server got, the more competitive it became, and the less valuable a normal player on the server felt. A massive faction could have dedicated builders, grinders, cannoners, PvPers, and members online across multiple time zones and multiple servers. A small group of friends, adults with jobs, really anyone that wasn't a no-life couldn't match it at some point. And this created a strange problem. Factions at first was advertised as a game mode where anyone could really build the largest empire on the server. In reality, many players existed mainly to provide resources and targets for the groups that actually controlled everything on the server. Competition is exciting when players believe they have a chance to reach the top, but once that result feels predetermined, competition doesn't really feel like anything anymore. Another issue that plagued factions was that it became increasingly difficult to understand what the hell was going on. Early on, the basic power fantasy was simple: build a strong base and use TNT to break into somebody else's base. Over time, this really simple back and forth TNT versus strong base concept turned into an entire technical subculture for Minecraft. To compete seriously, players needed a literal PhD in server-specific cannon mechanics, wall designs, buffers, chunk rules, custom enchants, everything. And even if you knew everything for one season, it could be reset. This kind of depth was really great for dedicated long-time factions community members who wanted something different each season. But it really made the mode almost impossible to explain to somebody who had never played before. And if you compare that to a modern economy SMP, you join, you collect something valuable, you sell it, your balance goes up, and you immediately understand what you're supposed to do. Everything else is secondary. Factions eventually reached a point where the most competitive version of that game mode was also the least version accessible to new players. Like I said, there was resets, and then more resets, and more resets. Resets were a good tool because everyone got another fair chance every couple of weeks to a month. The map opened, thousands of players rushed online, factions raced for resources and corner claims, and the entire economy of the server restarted again. For a few days, everything would feel good, but the resets also trained people not to really care about the world or the server itself. Base was temporary, balance was temporary, items were temporary, even the server population could feel temporary between resets. If you joined late into a season, the smartest move was just to wait for the next map. If your faction's main base got raided, again, just wait for the next map, it'll be reset and you can try again. This led to awful player retention, and instead of building a permanent community for the server, many servers were just constantly trying to recreate that launch day rush. Some servers would even open, sell ranks and crate keys, run a very short competitive map, close, and then return a couple weeks later under a new season or even a new name and new server identity. This pump and dump server cycle kind of damaged trust with the community. Why invest hundreds of hours into a server when you are not sure whether the world, your items, or the server itself is going to exist a few months later? On the topic of the pump and dump schemes, running a Minecraft server does cost money. Developers need to be paid, hosting needs to be covered, advertising for these kinds of servers is really expensive. Monetizing a server itself wasn't the problem for factions. The problem was that factions made competitive advantages extremely easy to sell and incredibly effective to the buyer. Servers could sell strong kits, extra faction power, extra claims, crate keys, custom enchants, currency, ranks, all in the hundreds of dollars. When your game mode focuses heavily around competition, every paid advantage feels more important for a player, and while a cosmetic purchase does not change who's going to win a faction season, an overpowered kit does. On top of this aggressive monetization making players more upset with the seasons, Minecraft and Mojang also had a big issue with it, blacklisting many of the most popular servers. The monetization issue was kind of a twofold attack. On one hand, you had normal players upset that people who spent money would outrank them every single season, and then you also had the company that your game is founded on telling you that your server is not allowed to run unless you change your monetization ways. While monetization was a huge issue in the factions community, what I really think happened was that the content just moved away from factions. For a long time, creators helped these servers feel important. You'd watch a YouTuber join a faction, build a base, raid an enemy, or compete for a top position, and then you would join the same server because you wanted to be part of the story, and if you were like me, you wanted to be in a Mr. Wolfless YouTube video. But Minecraft content changed. The audience moved towards SMPs, survival challenges, scripted wars, long-term videos, civilization events, lifesteal, and the videos built around all of these. Instead of watching a YouTuber's organized faction grind through a map on a reset, viewers watched one player attempt to be the richest, the strongest, the most feared. It was more narrative driven. The storytelling became way more personal. With factions falling out of favor, this mattered a lot because players often discover game modes through these creators. When the creators stopped making factions videos, fewer players learn why factions is exciting, the remaining audience gets older, fewer beginners come in to replace them as they burn out, and servers compete over the same shrinking group of players. Unfortunately, factions became a game mode built for people who already played and loved factions, and it was no longer creating new factions players to play. But with that, Minecraft players didn't just suddenly stop enjoying competition on servers. People still love to find and loot hidden bases. They love betrayal, PvP, alliances, and that kind of feeling of becoming the most powerful on the server. These core factions ideas survived, they just got reorganized into the modern economy SMP. Instead of creating a faction and claiming land, you begin the server alone randomly in the wild. Instead of faction power, you have your own personal wealth and whatever farm you made. Instead of controlling claimed territory, you control your farms, resources, and your hidden locations where you keep your stash. And instead of competing for the most faction value, you compete through your individual balance, items, kills, and on the leaderboards. This is the absolute beauty of the economy SMP formula. Anyone can make money and anyone can become powerful. A farming player can make money, a miner can make money, a trader can make money, a base hunter can make money, anyone can make money. There is no needing a team to be the best, you personally can become the best. DonutSMP is probably the clearest example of this. The server is usually described as a competitive or semi-anarchy survival experience. Players on it, just like factions, grind resources, sell items, and use markets to build up their hidden bases, fight other players, and grow their wealth. There is no requirement that every player join a massive team before they can participate. Anyone who joins the server understands they have to sell things to make money and then sell things to other players to make even more money. It takes that core competitive identity of factions, and DonutSMP makes it easier to access. The excitement of finding someone else's valuables is still there, the excitement of raiding a base is still there, it's just way more controlled at the player level to have fun. The core center of the game mode is focused on the player, not the faction. And with that, this is why I don't think factions actually disappeared like everyone says. The name became less popular, the complicated claim system, faction power, rosters, and wall designs are all gone, but the actual fantasy of factions is still here. Players still want to begin with nothing and build something worth protecting. They still want the strong rivals, they still want danger, and they still want the rare items that other people recognize, and they want to be the top dog. The economy SMP format just took that core fantasy and made it work for solo players, small groups, and casual grinders. Factions were all about which group controlled the server. Economy SMPs are which player can grind the longest and is the most intelligent while doing so. And that brings me to a shameless plug of the server I've been building, Broken Crown. I wanted to make an economy SMP, but I didn't want to copy Dr. Donut. Just like DonutSMP, players earn money, trade with one another, use shops and auctions, complete contracts, and compete to grow their balance to the top. But unlike Donut, players can specialize. They can specialize into alchemy, fishing, enchanting, farming. All of these are time-intensive activities that make you so much money. It moves away from the AFK farm format and into player-specific grinding. Okay, I'm done with the shameless plug. Factions was never just about land claims or TNT cannons. It was just about turning Minecraft into a survival competition. But over time, that game mode became too difficult to enter for the average player and too dependent on large groups. The audience changed, the content changed, and the Minecraft multiplayer experience changed with it. I don't think it's fair to say that the economy SMP format killed Minecraft factions. I think they inherited it. They took the wealth, danger, betrayal, competition, and player-driven stories and rebuilt them around the individual player, not the faction. And well, Broken Crown is my attempt to take the evolution one step further. Thanks for watching.